if you're going to have a discussion about the United States and imperialism and expansion in the 1800s and 1900s, you really can't do that without first looking at Washington's farewell address in 1796, in which he stated, "'Tis our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is to have with them as little political connections as possible." Now, in the 1800s and 1900s, and even today, one of the things we have not been able to do is stay out of international affairs with other countries. And shortly thereafter, 1796 and 1801, we wound up getting into a war with Barbary pirates on the North African coast. For years, what had been happening is that these Barbary pirates were receiving a bribe every year, and when they were receiving this bribe from countries, their ships would not be attacked, and those ships who did not pay the bribe or that tribute each year found that their ships would be attacked, they'd be seized, a lot of their sailors would be captured and forced into slavery in certain instances. Well, when Jefferson winds up becoming president, this was something that he never really liked. He considered it extortion. And when they finally raised that annual salary or that annual bribe or tribute to $50,000 a year, Jefferson at this point refused to pay it. And the leader of Tripoli then winds up declaring war on the United States. And the United States, in order to protect its merchant ships and protect its interest overseas, winds up sending over United States sailors and Marines to kind of defend our U.S. interests. Our entanglement with other countries doesn't stop in 1805, all right? When we get back to the Western Hemisphere, we wind up getting into a battle, or war, I should say, with Mexico. And in the Mexican-American War in 1846, we wind up acquiring Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. So when it comes to us following George Washington's advice and staying out of affairs with other countries, whether it be in this hemisphere or another hemisphere, it was something that we rarely did. And in certain instances, we wind up getting involved in international affairs so we could perhaps benefit it. And that's what you're going to see when we discuss imperialism. Imperialism is the policy of powerful countries seeking to control the economic and political affairs of weaker countries. Now, when we look at the United States, or any country for that matter, we did already discuss the Industrial Revolution. So it's very easy to compare countries to corporations or companies where they're constantly in competition with one another. And when we look at imperialism, and you're looking at countries that want to continue to gain power in other areas, there are a variety of reasons for it. And usually it has to do with wealth, improving the wealth, the strength, and the power of that particular country. But when we break down the reasons of imperialism, we can make a lot of connections to what we've already encountered in the 1400s and even in the 1600s when we look at why countries began to explore and why there was a desire for more land. But when we look at reasons for imperialism in this unit, we find that after the Industrial Revolution, or during it, I should say, industrialized nations needed more raw materials and new markets. And where are you going to be able to get that? You're going to have to go outside of your own country. Another thing that usually comes up, that has come up, is racism, the belief that one race is superior to the other. Well, before the United States starts to expand beyond the continental United States, you had already, many Europeans felt that they had a duty to spread their religion and culture to people who were less civilized. One instance where we can see that, where it's the most obvious and where people are most familiar with it, would be Columbus exploring and coming to the New World. And once he came to the New World, of course, there were, as some like to refer to as, the three G's. He was here for gold, God, and glory. And of course, when we're looking at gold, to make the Spanish crown just that more rich. When it comes to the glory aspect of it, more expansion, more land, because land is also power. But when it came to the God aspect and that little device to help you remember his goals, what he also wanted to do, and the Spanish missionaries also wanted to do, was to spread Christianity, because they viewed Native Americans as people who were primitive and inferior, and the whole goal here was to make them more civilized. When we're looking at the United States expanding and trying to get power in other countries and gain a foothold somewhere, you're also going to see missionaries are going to go to other areas such as China, again, to convert people over to Christianity. Another reason for imperialism is, again, that competition. Once the United States starts to open up for trade. When we look at the instance where Commodore Matthew Perry was sent to Japan in 1853 to open up trade, when the United States starts to look beyond the continental United States in the 1850s, we're still a rather young country. 1800s was still a very young country, and other European countries for years had been seeking colonies and power in other areas. So another reason for imperialism from the point or perspective of the United States is that European countries took over areas and closed their markets to other countries. So this is another reason why we're going to be an imperialistic nation. Of course, when we look at anything, when you look at something such as imperialism, there are going to be people who have, strong opinions for it and strong opinions against it. And we kind of just briefly discussed it when we looked at the Native Americans and when we looked at the need for power and how it can possibly benefit your country. But when we look at arguments for imperialism, there was that U.S. belief in cultural superiority. A word that comes to mind is ethnocentrism, where you have somebody who believes that their ethnicity or background is superior to others, and this is going to be one of these instances where you see this come up. Race, values, religions, and economics is going to be another argument for it. The goal, as they felt, was to civilize the rest of the world. So when we're looking at indigenous people in the Pacific, or when we're talking about Hawaiians, they're going to be perceived or seen as inferior, similar to the Native Americans, and the goal there is going to be to try and civilize them. Another argument for imperialism would be helping out lesser peoples in non-industrialized countries. The increase in productivity, the need for new markets to expand into. And of course, we're going to see that the United States needed more natural resources. Again, when we discuss the economic factors that come into it, in the late 1800s, particularly the 1890s, the economy was in trouble in the United States, and there was a depression that was taking place in 1893. So there was much more of a need for increased trade, increased natural resources. Another thing that does come up is social Darwinism. This was somewhat explored when we were looking at the Industrial Revolution unit, and we were talking about competition. Only the strongest would survive in terms of business. Well, when we're looking at countries and competing against one another for more land and more opportunities, and to get a stronghold in other regions of the world, social Darwinism is going to be a part of it. And social Darwinism is a prominent belief that people believe that the survival of the fittest applied to people and nations. So only the strong are going to survive here. When we get into the arguments against imperialism, all right, some people thought it was undemocratic. The United States does not have the military capabilities to protect an overseas empire. This is one of these bullets that you can kind of get some further discussion on, because maybe the goal here is when it comes to the United States, especially gaining control in the Pacific, is to try and gain more strategic locations for our military. For example, with Hawaii and how that's going to become a naval base, and gaining access to other islands throughout the Pacific. This is going to help expand our military as well. That's part of the goal, and also to protect merchant ships overseas. Again, an argument against it, when you go back to George Washington and his farewell address, the whole goal is to stay out of European affairs. If you're out of European affairs, there's a better chance that you may not get involved in one of their wars. When we look at, again, with wars and staying out of conflicts, one of the advantages that the United States does have is that we ourselves, you can view us as a castle, and what is surrounding most castles? A moat, and we're surrounded by the Pacific and the Atlantic. So when it comes to staying out of European affairs, it's easier for us to kind of play a defensive role, because if another country were to come and try and invade us, we would have somewhat of an advantage, that we'd be fighting on home field advantage, and we are surrounded by two big oceans, where it would take another country a lot of supplies, resources, a lot of logistical nightmares that they would have to get involved in to come and invade the United States and try to be somewhat successful. Another thing, people felt that imperialism was similar to what this country was found on. We were against England, and we kind of considered them. We did consider them a tyrannical country. So we ourselves, to kind of impose this onto other countries, some critics would feel that this wasn't fair because it's tyranny. Others felt that there's no need to expand overseas. We were a vast nation that had plenty of natural resources. So for us to expand or gain a foothold in other regions throughout the world, they felt it wasn't necessary because we had plenty of markets for goods.